What's up, my healthy friends? In 2022, it's my mission to coach 300 people to get control of their emotional eating so they can lose weight and actually keep it off without counting calories or eating rabbit food. Now, not too long ago, I was lucky enough to be interviewed on the Live Damn Well podcast. It was a blast, and we covered some great topics from social determinants of health through to behavior change, psychology, and nutrition. And today we're doing a bit of role reversal where the host of the Live Damn Well show is here with me today. I want you to meet Jorge Roman, whom is not only a podcast host, but also the author of the book Return to Human, of which he shares his own personal journey of battling depression, anxiety, insomnia, and food sensitivities until the moment he decided enough was enough. His book and podcast were born of hundreds of hours of research and being fed up and sick of the conflicting health information, which was useless at best and harmful at worst. He then became a health coach who's passionate about finding practical solutions to real-world health problems in this universe plagued by catchy headlines, clickbait, and half-truths. And don't we know that to be true after the last few years? Welcome to the podcast, Jorge. How you doing?
Thank you so much, man. That was the best intro I've heard of myself, so thank you.
People often say that. I don't know what I do to intros, but I'm taking it. Thanks, man.
That was great. Thank you.
And I just want to clarify, because I made this mistake in the early phases of us catching up, is for everybody that listens to this podcast and sees your name and says George, it's the Mexican Spanish enunciation Jorge, correct?
That's right. That's right.
All right, good. Yes. We've got it right this time.
We got it. You got it right, Matty.
So tell me, man, what motivated you to write a book, Return to Human? Like, what did you uncover in your health journey, in your study, that type of thing that was like, we need to get back to being human? And what is human?
Yeah, man. So, I mean, in a few words, it was, the book saved me. It was, I didn't know what Return to Human meant when I first started writing the book, right? And to really kind of paint the picture of where I was at with my own health and why I said that it saved me, which is not really an exaggeration, it's totally the truth, is for the first time ever, I was 19 heading into my sophomore year of college, and I've been a swimmer for a long time competitively. And so it was time to get my sports physical done. I talk about that in the book. And so, I was there, they were asking the regular questions, that they ask you about drugs, about alcohol, about sex and all that stuff. And then they asked a question that, I'd always heard, but I'd never really given it a second thought until that moment. Something clicked inside me. I don't know if I had just buried it away, but they asked, any thoughts of suicide? And at that moment, I choked up and I couldn't even answer the question, because for the first time I wanted to blurt out yes. And that scared the shit out of me. And it scared my doctor, right? Because my doctor was like she'd known me since I was little. It was my pediatrician. So she had no idea what was happening, right? And so, long story short, got back to school, and that was one of the toughest years of my life mentally. That was, with COVID starting up in that year, it was made even worse. It was exacerbated by all the stuff that was happening in the world, all the uncertainty and the stress. And so I basically went into this state of basically pure anger and hatred, and all of the really negative emotions started kind of exploding out of me. And so part of what happened was I was very, very dogmatic. At that point, I had just started looking into like quote unquote natural health, ancestral health, that sort of stuff. Before that, it was all like, Western medicine's the best. I didn't really give it a second thought, to be honest. And then at that moment when COVID hit, something about it just honestly kind of sparked like the conspiracy side of me for the worst. I will admit that it was bad. But what I will say is that I don't think it was because I actually believed them. What was happening, and I go more in depth in the book, was, I, in a twisted sense, and it's not like I thought about this consciously, but I really didn't want people around me to love me anymore. Because in my head, it was like, okay, if they still love me, I can't take my own life, because I was so depressed that was the way out for me. And it was the first time I'd ever thought about that. But in that year or two, it was like, that's the solution. That's how I stop feeling pain. That's how I escape this life. I don't think it's meaningful anymore. all of that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was like, all right, how can I push these people away so much that I can do what I wanted to do? And so at the end of the day, there were some people that I totally pushed away, and I, destroyed some friendships with that. But there were those few people, friends and family, who stayed around and were always supported me. And at that point I said, I can't do it. I cannot take this decision because I will leave a permanent hole in the fabric of their lives for as long as they live. And I could not fathom being the cause of so much suffering in a world which was already suffering. And so at that point, I made a commitment to myself. There's no going back. I'm going full force, and I know what will happen. I know where I've been. I was just about to take my life. So if I don't take action, I'm going to get there again. So it was all about action for me. It was like, okay, let me listen to literally everyone. I would listen to, the quacks. I would listen to the conventional medicine advocates. I listened to everyone because I was so desperate, right? And so this book came from a realization of my own depression. And, the ultimate solution for me was listen to everyone, because everyone's got a little bit of truth in them, right? All of the experts have something, right? All of them. Even if it's just a tiny little glimpse, a sentence that they said, something has to be true about what everyone is saying. We just have to be patient enough and open enough to listen to it. And so for me, it was like, wow, I need to write about this because this saved my life. And this could save the lives of so many other people, especially during COVID, right? When we were told that we couldn't do anything about our health, we were disempowered about our own capability of healing ourselves and making ourselves resilient. And so it was like, okay, I need to go to town. I need to write this book because otherwise this information is going to get lost just with me. And I can't have that happen.
Yeah. First, man, I just want to acknowledge you for being so open and vulnerable and sharing that story with us. It's really appreciated. And I probably wasn't too far behind you during those couple of years. And here, in Melbourne being the most locked down city in the world during that phase, like I had family members commit suicide, and I, at one point, I knew more people that had killed themselves than had COVID, which was one of the reasons I was very much also looking into we need to listen to other opinions because I actually don't know anyone that's got COVID, and it's like 18 months into a pandemic. And the whole first year that I worked in the hospital of that pandemic, none of the doctors that I worked with and myself had come across a patient with it. And I was like, we're in Melbourne's biggest hospital. Why don't we know anybody with COVID? And that's, kind of led me to be super confused. It's like, why do I know more people that have taken their own life because of this situation than has COVID? And there's so many questions that come up. But I love what you shared just there about listening to the quacks, because I find it interesting because the definition of a quack is that they believe themselves. So by definition, literally all of us are quacks.
I didn't know that was the definition.
Yeah, it's like that I'm paraphrasing the dictionary definition, but it's basically that you believe your own version of reality. So it's literally like everyone is a quack.
That's everyone, yeah, exactly.
So, why do you think countries, particularly Western world privileged countries, and I often think about this sometimes when I'm, in the throes of my own depressive mind or trying to navigate my own thoughts, but depression, anxiety, suicide are much higher in privileged countries. And I know yourself, having a background from Latin America, it's a more difficult life, generally speaking. And I've got people that work as part of the podcast and the business that are from the Philippines. And I've had conversations with them about, the fact that, Western privileged countries have this tendency towards depression, whereas these other countries that struggle, that life is actually really tough for in comparison, seem to have lower numbers. Based on, your own journey compared with all of the literature and information you've consumed, why do you think we have that, affliction to move in that direction?
Yeah, well, a few things pop in my head. One of them would be faith. So I think, faith and community, basically. I'll talk about the latter one more just because I'm not really a religious person, but, we can kind of get into that more later if need be. But the community aspect, I think, is really important because, being in having grown up basically in the States, but also having been to, like kindergarten in Mexico and, having a lot of family there and visiting and, being in Costa Rica and, seeing what life is like here. It's given me a lot of different perspectives. People here are really happy. Like people here are, especially now with the gas prices rising, food prices rising, they're still happy. They're joking all the time. And then I look and see their houses, and they're like these tiny houses built up with these like, like metal kind of shacks with like rusty, material. And it's like, wow, this is freaking me out. This is something, what can we learn from these people that we don't have in the States? And so for me, growing up in the States, it was very much like a popularity contest, like always. And that was weird to me because all I wanted, growing up in Latin America, it was different. And, my parents were very warm, and like, it's usually very, like if you go to Mexico, people will greet you with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, right? It's not like this like firm handshake of like, robotic thing that people do in the States, right? And so that's what I grew up with, and that was totally lost. And in a sense, I did kind of feel that missing as I was growing up, is the sense of community. And this is one of the, we talked about this on my podcast. This is one of the major components of a blue zone, right? It's like these longevity hotspots. I mean, I'm right next to Nicoya right now, which is one of the blue zones, right? And so I see that here. I see the community is strong. And of course, you'll have your disagreements and every now and then, but like in general, people are just kind of click. And they basically depend on each other for food. They depend on each other for transportation. It's such a different culture. And I think community, not just because of the indirect health benefits, but because of the direct health benefits. If you feel like you're supported by your community, you're going to feel safer. You're probably going to feel more gratitude, and you're going to feel less of the stress fear response that we got blasted at us by the media during COVID, right? And so you're going to be basically more resilient to stress, because you know that if something happens in the world, if something happens inside you with your health, you have this community that you can fall back on. And it's often very fake in the States, is what I've noticed.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think too, like for myself growing up, my entire life in a very privileged, wealthy, luxury kind of country compared to much of the world, you never want to be seen as the person that's complaining. And when suffering happens, share it with as few people as possible, because you don't want to be that guy that doesn't have his shit together type thing. And through the pandemic, I mean, I live in my own place by myself. You're kind of relegated to that situation anyway, whilst the world is basically, perceptually burning around you, or burning down around you. And so I think, I agree that, that community aspect definitely has a big part to play. And I think another part possibly, and let me know if you agree or disagree, but is the fact that there's almost no time in some of those communities for sadness or struggle, because it's like, if you sleep today, you might be starving tomorrow. So it's like, or if you sit down and think about your feelings today, you don't have a choice. You'll be gone, basically. You won't have an option of suicide because homicide will happen or type thing, And so, and that's what I've talked to some of my staff about too. And it's like, like if we have a day or a week out of action or on stress leave, like nobody's eating. The whole family isn't eating, type thing. Whereas we've got the luxury that in these countries like both of you and I live in, that we can kind of nurture ourselves, but it's a fine line, right, between nurture and enabling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I see that, the first part of what you said really resonated with me, which is that, if you have no time for that kind of stuff that we have in the U.S., right? And so my one of my friends here has worked with people who deal with addiction. And so he did that for a really long time. And so one of the things that he knew that actually helped in the field of being a social worker, that actually helped, was taking these recovering addicts to work on a farm. And so that tells us a lot, right? Because what is farm life like? Well, you can't just like refresh and have this feed pop up with likes, right? You wait for, you do what you can do day by day. And so the dopamine drips are very small. And so you learn to kind of go day by day and, love the process rather than just waiting for instant gratification and basically being a compulsive dopamine slave in a sense, right? It's like you really become patient and you become more grateful because, all this hard work that I put in, now I'm getting to the harvest. Now I can harvest my beans and the rice and the bananas and the plantains because I put in so much work, and this feels so good now, and I feel so grateful that I have this food that I grew myself, basically.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of Johan Hari. He's done a few TED Talks. He's got a few books on depression, and I've got the book here, Lost Connections, and he says the opposite to addiction is connection. Like the way to solve addiction is that, addicts feel disconnected from their reality, from their community, from themselves. And so they're seeking this euphoric experience of connection to self, God, whoever it might be. And that the way to solve addiction is connection. And I think that kind of farm work is probably one connection, but in maybe not a human way per se, but a connection to the land and to our ancestral evolution of being human. And of course, re-regulating those dopamine pathways.
Of course, and to the food and to our circadian rhythms and to the seasons, like everything, right?
Yeah, which is basically, the handbook for natural health, right? It's
of course.
Circadian rhythms, good sleep, connection to the earth, good healthy food, it's the whole package.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, my dream, as I kind of alluded to in my book, is to buy a few goats and chicken and live in the countryside. When I retire, that's kind of my dream.
Yeah, actually on my goals list in life is to own a regenerative farm one day, so that I might do a little bit of work on it, but I'm hoping then I can get a few people in to help. But yeah, that's my goal too.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So throughout your book, I was really impressed by the fact that I guess you and I went on a really similar journey in the sense that, we sort of uncovered. We believed one thing really passionately, and maybe not passionately, but naively or without question in the beginning, and then came to this place where we were like, oh, hang on, natural health has got a lot to offer. And then I think both you and I swung all the way to pharmaceutical drugs and medicine is evil, and natural health and the way that we lived in tribes is the only way forward. And then I think you present in the book a really nice sort of natural in between, a really healthy in between. And I've got a quote here that I copied from your book that I wanted to share because I think it exemplifies it really well. So I want to read it, which is, I thought the solution to all our health problems was either one of two things, found in the depths of PubMed, a hidden goldmine of dusty old scientific papers just waiting to be found, or two, to reclaim our health by living exactly like our ancestors, relinquish all worldly belongings, buy a few goats and chickens and live in the countryside. The typical naturalistic fallacy which argues that if something exists in nature, it must be good for you, and that all modern things are bad. How did you arrive through that journey at where you are now, and why the swing from medicine to natural to somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, man. Well, honestly, it was because it was kind of destroying my life. I was really, really knees deep in the naturalistic fallacy of like, we need to go and, make tribes again, and we need to grow our own food and be hunter-gatherers and no light and, no electricity, all this stuff, right? And it was really damaging a lot of my relationships and my friendships. And I saw that happening and I was like, hold on a second. I don't actually fully know this to be 100% true. What's going on inside me that makes this feel like it's true? Because I felt I felt like I was right about everything to do with COVID. I thought the vaccines were terrible, and I thought, that was like me in the really dogmatic shoes of modern medicine is bad, right? And so at that point, it was like, wait a second, I haven't actually gone through and looked at the studies yet. Like, this isn't right. And so that's where I kind of, pendulum swing back to the middle a little bit, because I was like, hold on, if I'm going to say these things, I need to be sure that they're true. And, not just that, I'm really doing myself a disservice. I'm doing my friends a disservice and my family, because they think I'm crazy and I think they're crazy. So, this is a good way for me to figure out who's crazy. No, it's It's a good way for me to figure out what was going on. And so that's where I kind of I really dug deep into the literature. And I went into PubMed and I searched up everything that was said on either CNN or Fox News or wherever I read it from. I would go through, look for the source and read it and see if it was true. And I did that with anything. I would listen to a podcast. A lot of people, on the more conventional side of like health, they're like, oh yeah, all these like health gurus just listening to podcasts and think that they're authorities. And I was like, I was kind of hurt by that because I was probably one of those health gurus in the beginning, right? Or I thought myself as one of those. But then I was like, no, they're right. How can you trust someone that just says something? You need to go in and look at it for yourself and decide, hold on a second, these methods are kind of shady. Or hold on a second, this is a natural supplement company study, but they funded it. So there's still something shady going on with that, right? And so I started to see that it's not that black and white, right? It's not, ancestral health versus modern medicine. It's let's actually look at what the evidence says. But, going beyond that, when I say the evidence, a lot of people get stuck with like what I call the science, right? And so the science is basically whatever you think it is. And so a lot of people use it to back up their claims, even though they have no real understanding of what the science really says. And so that was me at the beginning. It was me kind of being like, oh, that's what the science says. The science says that. And so I heard that also on the other side of the spectrum where it's like, no, this is a deadly thing and you need to bleach your groceries and you need to put 4 masks on. Otherwise you're going to die. That's the science. Listen to the science, bro. And I was like, no way. And so I actually went in, looked at the study on masks, looked at the study on how transmissible COVID is and, via which mechanisms it's transmissible. Is it droplets? Is it, is it more of like the smaller kind of aerosols? And so I looked into all that stuff firsthand. I wanted the primary source. And so that's where I started to learn, hold on, there's a total disconnect between science and what we actually get from the media. And I'm not so sure that all of it is malicious. I think just, media outlets just want views. And so they make it as dramatic as possible and they don't understand science. So they just kind of say what they want to say. So it gets them views and it, makes their political side look good, basically. So that's what happened with COVID. And so, long story short, I just really started to notice that I wasn't being honest with myself. And so for me to start being honest with myself, it was, okay, I need to start going in and checking this thing out for myself.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. And I really want to commend you on your confidence in putting this content in the book, because I think one of the issues we're facing is that a lot of, irrelevant of your modality of profession with health, whether it be naturopaths or doctors or TCM people or energy medicine healers, too many people are scared to speak about what they believe the truth to be or their interpretation of the last few years. And I think that's a problem because then we've got this bias of the only people are allowed to speak. And I say this as a deplatformed Instagrammer. The only people that are allowed to speak have one narrative or one perspective. And I think it correlates even. So I was down this wormhole for the last 10 years of figuring out the difference between what is true and what isn't true. And what I discovered hanging out in PubMed and places like that is that actually in the natural health world and with food and nutrition and a lot of TCM and acupuncture, there's actually loads of clinical trials. There's actually loads of evidence that sit in the depths of these medical journals. And so when you come out and say these things, about natural health, people are like, oh, that's all woo-woo. And it's like, actually, the only studies that we hear about or that are utilized are usually ones that pharmaceutical companies can in some way profit from, and some of the other supplement companies can profit from them. But the point is that the same thing happens with COVID, is that there's tons of studies that show both sides of the conversation, inefficacy of vaccines, very low transmissibility rates. But again, this doesn't fit the public narrative. It's not that there's not evidence to be looked at and considered. And this is the big issue, right, is that we're not looking at all of this evidence in a balanced perspective and, more importantly, a contextual perspective, because the health of a 17-year-old athlete is different to a 77-year-old person in a home, right? So I guess all that to come around to the point is that, what do you think it has been going on that forces us to believe one narrative or to hear one narrative, and why do you think the other side is so judged as quackery, as ridiculousness, when actually there's clinical trials there?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is our kind of need to fit into a tribe and have this basically us versus them mentality. I mean, I feel like this has been going on for all of human history, where we pit one side against the other. And I mean, if you think about it, not really to throw religions under the bus, but kind of to throw religions under the bus. That's been like the major wars that have happened historically have been due to religion, right? And like persecution and like, mass murder. It's all been religion, and it's all belief. It's all things that can't really be proved, in a sense, right? And so, and yeah, for me, something that you said earlier, I never saw myself as like conservative. But, you said like, a lot of these media outlets are just kind of giving us this one narrative. And I never saw myself as a conservative, but this was the first time that I was like, hold on, why is Fox News getting like all this crap about them being conspiracy theorists now? Like, I think like some of this should be investigated and some of it could be valid. And like, I actually went in and I looked into the studies on like, okay, is this made in a lab? Is this not made in a lab? And like, I started looking into the studies and like, this is legitimate scientific debate. Like within if you go into like, major journals, they're actually debating this. It's not like, CNN versus Fox News that aren't debating it, but they're just kind of calling each other names. They're actually like considering it a possibility. And so I think that is real science. Real science is the ability to actually question things that seem to be true and actually, being very rigorous with that. That's real science. What the media has made us think real science is whatever you basically want to believe and what makes you feel good. And that's not science. That's just belief. And I would say that, what happened to me, to answer your question, what happened to me was that it was basically an external manifestation of what was going on inside me. So it wasn't that I actually truly believed, that vaccines are all bad and modern medicine is terrible. It was just that I was so in a place of so much hurt. And I was so depressed and, I felt like the world sucked that in a sense that was a way for me to, it's like a personality trait, basically. I mean, that's how we kind of filter the world through our personality traits, right? It's like if you are an angry person, you're probably going to find the most angry perspective and news article you can possibly find and latch onto it. And that's your truth, right? But if you're a really positive person, you're probably going to see that, kind of overlook it. And maybe you'll find another article that's like a really positive one. And that really resonates with you. So I think, we filter things in the outside world through our personality.
Yeah, I think impartiality is very hard to execute in practice because to take all judgment out of a scenario almost means you don't care about it. So it's like you lose the passion for what you're talking about by trying to not care about who's right or wrong and be impartial. It's like this kind of little, moral conundrum inside oneself about how do I go about being truly impartial? But I agree. Totally. I think we filter the world through our personality, which is obviously built upon our core beliefs. And I think as well, one of the big things that I, was working on, and have been working on for years, but really came up was that, if I let the external world outside of my body control how angry I am or how happy I am, then I'm not in control of my own life at all because my locus of control is outside of me. So I'm not in control at all, basically. Like everybody else is in control of me. And so, when the penny dropped through COVID of my anger and, going down all of these rabbit holes, which would be considered conspiracies, although me and hundreds of thousands of doctors and scientists that have, worked in these fields for years, are in those groups, but many people would say it was conspiracy theorists. But, I realized I was like, okay, I need to take back control of my own state of being and decide what I let enter my physical body through my eyes, through my ears, type thing, and through my mouth, because there was a lot of emotional eating going on because I was just despairing constantly. I was like, this is it. We're gonna be slaves, and I actually don't disagree with that long term. But with facial recognition software and all the tracking that they do of us and the cameras that are absolutely everywhere these days. But the point is that if I choose to let them control me, the outcome is going to suck for me. I'm not religious either, but I believe that, from maybe an entropy standpoint, so a scientific standpoint, that the world is always full of equal amounts of good and bad, and it can never it can never be swayed in either direction, because then the entropy of the universe would basically explode. So, so it's like, it's just where you orient your focus, right? But also you got to be careful not to be ignorant as well.
Yeah, it's a tough balance for sure. And I mean, I can't say that I have the solution for not being so, biased, I guess. But it would really just be like, kind of self-questioning. I mean, maybe even talking about it with people, like actually debating it with people who don't agree with you. Like, I'm really lucky because at my school, there's like this culture of like debate. And so like, it'll just be like, me and like 3 other of my friends, and we'll just be like staying up until like 3 a.m. and we'll just be like debating all this stuff. And like, it's great because all of us have such different perspectives. And so that's where you grow, and it sucks and it hurts your ego because sometimes they'll say like, dude, that's not true at all. Like, what are you talking about? And then they present evidence and then you're like, oh shit, like I'm so dumb. Like, it hurts, but you got to be willing to, if you're really committed to the truth. And, that was one of my core values that I chose when I was trying to rebuild myself from depression. It was one of my values is going to be the truth, because look where not actually valuing the truth got me. It got me towards almost taking my life. So I need to really value it in the highest regard. I need to really value truth. And so I think that if we really take a step back and we go into the debate with an open mind, and we're like, okay, we're actually both looking for the same thing. We might just have different information. All right, let's get together and let's talk about it.
I often think that when I think of like, the nutrition wars on Instagram, where you've got, your carnivore doctors and your vegan doctors, and like everyone's like judging each other. And it's like actually 99% of what we're all doing is the same. Like, as in we're all just trying to get people healthier. We just disagree on this little part of our philosophy. But most of us are all in the same space. So I often think about like, and that's kind of the reason as well that I don't really I'm not super dogmatic about a particular diet, because I might be wrong one day. Like, there might be a new study, or the next generation of kids, their health is going to be different because they've been exposed to different things, and that diet might not be ideal for that group of people. It's totally scary, right?
Yeah. No, I can't imagine what the next generation is going to look like. And I'm like, I'm not looking forward to that.
Well, that's the reason we're here, to fix that stuff.
It is 100%.
So, I'm curious what advice you would give to people, like in the context of return to human. How do they identify where they're not being superhuman, or where they're not being very human-like in their life, and how do they begin a return to being human?
Yeah, so for me it was, it's complicated, because when I started writing the book again, I had no idea what that title meant. I was like, oh, Return to Human, sounds cool, I'm going to go with it, right? And then as I started writing my book, it was like I would reread the document that I had, and it was like, who the hell wrote this? This is trash. This is dogmatic BS. Like, how could I write this, right? And so that was basically, in a sense, my process of becoming more human. It was like, I'm going to become more critical of myself. I'm not going to let myself get carried away by what I think I know. And I'm going to be more critical of the world around me. I'm not just going to take what someone says at face value, because that causes a lot of harm. And finally, I end the book with a really important component of this whole thing that really got me out of my depression, and it helped me, and it's compassion. And it's a little bit cliche to say that we just need more compassion, but we do. And in my experience, if I hadn't been so desperate to make a change in my life, but if I hadn't been so adamant about being compassionate towards myself, whenever I would have failed, I would have, that's it, I'm done, right? Like, you're not open to things if you're not compassionate. And, it's tough to be compassionate when you're in a state of fight or flight, which is what we've been basically spoon-fed this whole entire time. And so basically, if your house is on fire, you can't mow the lawn. Can't remember where I heard that from. I wish I could give credit to that person, because that's a great quote. But like, if you are worried about, your groceries having a little bit of COVID on them, and you have to like go out and basically be in a hazmat suit to get your groceries, right? You're not going to be worried about being compassionate to someone and hearing what they have to say and being all nice, right? Yeah. You are in a state of this is dangerous. Like, you're telling your amygdala, like, we need a, full force. This is a fear response. We need to basically put all our resources towards the stress response. And so part of what my book also seeks to do is, like, I think it's chapter 4 where I talk about, like, immune health begins in the mind. And so that's where I think it starts. And it's not just immune health, it's all health, right? Like, for me, it was like the starting point. It's like, if I didn't start to work through, my trauma, my negative limiting beliefs and all that stuff, and I really made a commitment that I'm going to do whatever it takes to heal myself, then I wouldn't have gotten very far. And so I think it's a story about compassion, but it's also about making sure that stress and fear response, like, you're controlling it through diet, through exercise, through sleep, through, limiting EMF exposure, to getting the correct light exposure, really in training your circadian rhythms correctly. All of these things that really do help. And most of the things I talk about in my book are free. There's only a few select ones that are like, okay, this supplement might be helpful in this case, and that sort of stuff. But it's really, okay, how can we work on our physiology so that we're less likely to react negatively to someone? We're less emotionally volatile. And then how can we, also work on the psychological side, which is, the meditation, all of this sort of stuff that can also help us become more compassionate people, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful, like a beautiful concept, because, compassion, kindness, we've all been in places where we believed a certain thing, and through this process, I think we've looked at those people in the hazmat suits and been like, oh, look at this crazy idiot, but it's like, if we reflect on our own life, we can probably pull something out where we were as equally as committed to a particular version of the truth that we were, told, just in a different context. And I think that relatability would help people develop compassion and be like, oh, I was there once. Like, and in sort of going through my own journey of managing my mental health and seeing psychologists and stuff. Now when I'm connected to people or around people that are losing their shit or just having life go terribly, I'm just like, I get it. I was there. Yeah. Rather than being like, look at this idiot, get your shit together, mate. Like,
Exactly, right. And that's where the compassion piece comes in. It's like, you can't really listen and be open to new ideas if you're not willing to be compassionate, because they are probably in the same place that you're at. They just have a different opinion, right? It's like they're also really entrenched in their beliefs, and they only believe what they believe, and they're really, really emotionally volatile. They're in the same place as you. Like, be compassionate for the fact that they are so similar to you. The only thing that is different is just the words that they're saying, like the beliefs that they have.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're so incredibly similar. And one thing that keeps popping up in anybody who's being sort of philosophical about this whole COVID scenario is like, if there's anything that we do know from history, it's that humans forget really quickly, and generations and generations and thousands of years of humans have done the same thing and responded in the same way and been just as divided, whether it be kings, queens, emperors, whoever is invading your country to slaughter everybody, the narrative has always been pretty similar. It's, I think this and you don't, so I win or I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, that's it, right? And I think but I do think I'm starting to be a little bit more hopeful now, just because every generation that I keep seeing, and this is funny because, I'm like 21 years old and I'm getting into all this health stuff, right? And so when I first got to working as a health coach, that's why I'm here in Costa Rica, they were like, what the hell is this? Like, you're 21 years old. First of all, what do you know about health? And second of all, what do you care about health? You should be out partying and drinking your ass off until, wake up the next morning on the street, right? Like, this is what they expect. That's what I was doing at 21. Well, that's what is expected, right? It's like, that's the expectation, but it's changing, and it really is, because I have friends like myself that are really, really taking care of their health, and that matters to them. And so every single generation is changing. And, my girlfriend, she actually was tutoring these elementary school students, and she was tutoring them on wellness stuff. So breathwork meditation, stress, how to cope with that. And they know so much. It's crazy. It's like they know what, I knew probably when I was 15, right? It's like they knew how, they knew what coping mechanisms were. They knew what they know what their feelings are, and they can name them, and they're aware of them, and they're conscious of them. So I think every generation is slowly starting to be a little bit more conscious and aware of health. And so I think that's probably going to help us. I hope it does. But I'm a little bit hopeful for the future with that.
So, given that you brought up your age, I'm 32, right? I often am referred to as young in this space. I'm often, if on summits, I'm usually the youngest speaker. And the fact that I work with women, a lot of people say, Matty, why do you work with women? You're a guy. Like, why do you specialize in that? And I'm like, well, one, have you ever had a male doctor? Probably.
Right.
Yeah. But even at 32, I'm often referred to as like wise for my age, or like just got an old soul type of thing. So because I feel like I'm often having to prove myself to these people that call me, young, young, you're much younger than me. So my question is, why should people listen to you?
Why should people listen to me? Well, they shouldn't. They shouldn't necessarily. If something resonates that I say, then look it up and try it yourself. Right? Never take anything that I say as truth. Never take anything that anyone says as truth until you research it yourself, try it yourself. I'm huge on, this is something I talk about with my clients a lot. N=1 experiment, right? You are your own experiment. And for people that aren't, familiar with the scientific literature, N is just like the sample size, like the number of people in your study. And so N=1 is the study of how you respond to foods. It's the study of what helps you with sleep that may not help someone else. It's the study of everything that, you can't really look at it from a study. Like, you can't get that information from a study. You have to do your own journaling and really put in the work. And so why should people listen to me? Well, they shouldn't necessarily listen to me. If something that I say sounds like it could be true, or if something that I say sounds totally stupid, then go and, look it up yourself and see if it's true or if it's not true, right? I think that's how we should really approach everything. But, I think that's really all it comes down to, is your own personal experimentation of your health. And I think that's where medicine is going, right? I think that's where health is going, is personalized medicine. That's becoming huge because, like you said at the beginning, it's like a 17-year-old healthy male or female. I don't know why I said male, but 17-year-old. They're much different in their health status than, typically like the elderly. And so why is medicine so... basically they like need to just give a blanket statement for everyone. And that was true with the vaccines, and that was true with, that's true with the diet, like the food pyramid and like my plate and all that stuff is like, let's give everyone a cookie cutter stuff. No, let's not do that because it doesn't work, right? We need to look at how you respond to something, and we need to really, there's of course there's common things. We're human, but there's a lot of individuality between people. And so we really, that's what we need to focus our attention on, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. And I think I also noticed the shift in the up and coming generation in regards to health and wellness. And they have, I know I've got a friend of a friend who teaches meditation to primary school kids. Like, this stuff is becoming normal, and things like naming your emotions. However, I have a potentially controversial thought, which is that, and this is like totally theoretical and rabbit hole stuff, but it's like, if we make all the kids, the next generation, emotionally together, compassionate and understanding, does that mean we no longer have any warriors? And I mean that, are we more controllable from this place of peace and just acceptance of the horror of the world? And maybe we need I'm glad David Goggins is on the front line of war, because he's broken as fuck. Like, he is so traumatized, and that's the kind of warriors we need on the battlefield. You know what I mean?
I see what you're saying. I'm a big fan of Dr. Jordan Peterson, and one thing that he says, and he says it a lot, is like, you should be a monster and then learn how to control it, right? I think what often passes off as, and this is totally him, right? This is not me. Like, I'm not taking credit for what I'm about to say, but what he says is, what often passes off for, nobility and like, being a good person and, basically all the virtues, is really cowardice. And so what we need to do is we need to in my opinion, is make people strong, make people physically and mentally strong. And also, you know, of course, you need to pay attention to your emotions and take care of your mental health. But making people, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener at war, right? So we need to have people that are strong and capable and are willing to fight. And really, we all have this sort of like, I don't know if it's like this angry person inside of us, this like passionate human inside of us. And a lot of people, because they want to be perceived as a nice guy, they just kind of like smush it down. But it's there. It's there. And I think we should let it out in ways that are productive.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, being able to access, and I can only speak for men, but women as well, but, being able to access the myriad of emotions that humans experience without judgment and, without, toxic masculinity judging you for, your anger and aggression and all of the things that built the world that we live in, basically, those really masculine attributes, which isn't saying that love and kindness wouldn't produce the same or a better outcome. It's just that, I think that we need to move away from this world of, people disagreeing with, if you disagree online, you stop following them, because it creates these echo chambers of belief systems. And I actually used to, when I was on Instagram, I used to follow a heap of vegan doctors and stuff and accounts. And I actually think that being totally vegan is mostly a bad decision long term. But I would perpetually follow these people to be like exposing myself to this kind of thing. One, building my own resilience and not being as dogmatic in my own beliefs, but also open to the possibility that everything has elements of truth. And I think practicing that area of your emotional flexibility is really important. And I would encourage everybody to start following people you hate,
100%.
Because it'll make you stronger.
It'll make you stronger. It'll make you smarter. It'll make you a better person. Like it will. Even though sometimes it's triggering sometimes because you're like, this doesn't fit in with what I believe. Like, you get angry, but at the end of the day, you will be better equipped to deal with people like that. And so, like, if you ever come across, like I've had, like, vegan clients here and, they'll be like, oh, but red meat is cancerous. And they'll be like, like, maybe you should look into, like, this study here or, like, read up on this guy, because I'll be better equipped to be like, I know the counter argument now because I've heard what they have to say. And so it's important it's important to hear what other people say that are outside of your echo chamber.
Yeah, and I think it's really, unless you end up on somebody else's phone, laptop, or Netflix account, you totally forget the algorithm exists. And then when you accidentally open up somebody else's profile or you're at a friend's house and you're like, whoa, this looks so different to my YouTube, right? And then you remember, the algorithm is perfectly curating this based on every recorded click, watch time, and then it's kind of this very brief reminder. But then you go back to your own phone, your own computer, and you're like, you totally think that your worldview is the one that everybody must have, which is something I think we need to be more cognizant of, is that your perspective online is being curated, so you have to actively go out of your way to follow other opinions, other perspectives, and coming back to that compassion, it will probably make you more compassionate because you'll be seeing how other people arrive at their conclusions and being like, right, I get how you got there now,
Yes, absolutely. And something you said at the beginning, which is that people are really scared to talk about the opposing view of COVID, which, I mean, I don't know if I should call it opposing view. It's just another perspective of COVID, basically, is that there are a lot of mainstream doctors that I followed that actually, like, towards the end of the pandemic, they were writing articles being very critical of their peers. And they were like one I will name is Dr. Peter Attia. He is like mainstream of the mainstream, like cutting edge, like very evidence-based, like one of the most ridiculously smart people I've ever heard talk. And he was one of the people, like, go read his articles on COVID. Like, I really strongly recommend anyone listening, go read his articles on COVID, listen to his podcast episodes on it, because he's incredibly balanced. And we haven't gotten that balance from conventional medical advocates, basically. We've gotten a one-size-fits-all narrative and a one-size-fits-all treatment to the pandemic. And so I think, people like him, they are what we need because, he has a huge following. And for him to stand up, and it's sad that this has to happen, but, like, for him to stand up and tell the truth is, like, is scary, and it's bravery. Like, that's what bravery is, because he wasn't willing to hide behind, what was the normal traditional narrative, and he, said what he said. And I think that's a good thing. We do need more of that.
I agree. And that was very much the doctors and scientists that I was getting behind during the process. It's like, what has this particular professor that's done vaccine science for 30 or 40 years that's risking the lives of literally his family? Like, because some of these things get to the point where, some shady stuff happens behind the scenes. They've got millions of dollars worth of legal fees, and Dr. Peter McCulloch is one as well. It's been vocal and on Joe Rogan. But many of these doctors and scientists, they're up against multi-billion, $500 billion pharmaceutical organizations that could bury them in legal fees and, all of the possible situations. So those people that stand up in the face of absolutely losing everything and not having, not being like a trillionaire themselves in the process, they're the people that I really got behind, because I'm like, if this group of people, which is actually quite large, have everything to lose, deplatformed, business closes, being arrested in some instances, like, why are they so passionate about risking everything?
Yeah, I mean, they have everything to lose. Like, the people who I had on the back cover of my book that reviewed it, who were brave enough to say, like, I stand with this message. A lot of them, or I shouldn't say a lot of them, but some of them lost their licenses because they were willing to say some of that stuff, and they were willing to, for example, like ivermectin, and I don't even want to like really get into that because, I'm not an expert whether or not like it works or it doesn't work. I just know there's two sides to the story, right? And so at the beginning, they started to get some data, and, some promising data. And they said, okay, well, since there's no treatment for this at the beginning, I'm going to try this. I'm going to treat my patients. And since there's really no money to be made in that because it's a generic drug, then it's like, they're literally like, why would they say that? Why would they come out and say that, risking their licenses, not for any profit, but just because of the welfare of their patients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's impressive that it's good to know, because I when I was in the phase of like all modern medicine is bad and it's full of medical robots that just do what they're told and paint within the color within the lines type thing, and then this came along and it's all of these people stood up and I was like, oh, that's kind of restored my faith in medicine, because it's like it is full of people, not just one or two that we heard on Joe Rogan, but thousands across the world, if not millions. And I've signed documents and things, petitions as part of scientists and doctors organizations, which have had 100,000 plus signatures on them in response to some of this stuff. And it's just, it actually reignited my hope. It's like, oh, there is some good guys in the system. This is great.
Yeah, no. And I mean, even these conventional medicine advocates that I'm talking about that were willing to go against the narrative, some of them still got vaccinated. It's like, you don't have to choose one or the other. Like, you could take your own choice and still like be critical about how the pandemic was handled and still, decide that there's some good stuff with modern medicine. Like, you don't have to choose. Yeah.
Well, and based on the writing of your book and all the COVID research and well, just simply being a human that was around in the last couple of years, what is your ideas or 2 cents on the topic of how do we avoid being so manipulated and taken advantage of again?
Oof.
I know it's a big one.
Yeah. Well, I think so there are some people that I follow on Instagram that are incredibly entrenched in what I call, quote unquote, the science. And so they're like the super vegan doctors that are, like wear 4 masks and, never go outside again, like never touch anyone again, like we're wearing masks forever. And, I look at them and I'm just thinking to myself, like, wow. I mean, not only should we like, I mean, we should listen to them like we've been talking about, like we should obviously like pay attention to what they're saying. But I think in order for us to not get so entrenched, and where I was going with that, was that these doctors kind of like shun people who try to take care of their own health. They not shun, but they look down on people who try to take their health into their own hands, basically. Like, I've seen that over and over. It's like, no, you're not a doctor. Like, stop listening to biohacking podcasts. Stop listening. Actually, one of the posts that I saw was like, stop listening to Dr. Peter Attia's podcast about fixing your own health. Like, this is bullshit. Like, you should go to a doctor, right? They know way more than you. It's like, all right, like, you don't know everything. Like, don't pretend like you do either, just because you have an MD next to your name. You're going to know a whole lot, but you're not going to know everything. And it pains me to see MDs who are like that are like, you shouldn't take control of your own health. And so to get back to your question, I think that in order for us to not be kind of taken advantage of, and for us to not, our emotional buttons not be pressed at basically at their wish, the media and whoever else they is, right? We need to be informed. We need to be well informed. And that goes back to, kind of the whole purpose of my book is like, be open to all perspectives and be informed. Because it matters, right? And like, I was doing a lot of research on COVID, and for me, it was like, this is necessary. This is what's happening in my life. And a lot of like my peers were like, dude, what are you doing? Like, wasting your time doing so much research. Like, you should just, do what you're told and, just go along, and this will be over soon if we all just, get vaccinated and whatever, right? And I was like, no, this is the most relevant thing in our lifetimes. Like, you need to know what's happening, and that's not coming from a conspiracy side. That's coming from a, practical, realistic side. It's like, you need to know what's happening. You can't just like duck and cover and, ask for the grown-ups to take care of you, right? Like, the grown-up experts aren't going to take care. You're an adult. You need to inform yourself. Like, you're smart enough and you're capable enough, and everyone is. It's like a lot of the PhDs and like the MDs that, that I'm talking about, that like kind of are disappointed with people taking care of their own health. It's like they don't think we're capable. It's like they think normal people aren't intelligent or something. And it's like totally not the case. It's like, we all are very intelligent people. Like, I would say, like, don't underestimate how smart someone is. Like, really, like, never do, because you're always going to be surprised at how much smarter they are than they seem.
Well, and going back to Jordan Peterson is that, and he often gets emotional when he talks about this, is that humans need such a small amount of encouragement to do well in the world. And I think if you've got someone that's like confused about their health or overwhelmed on a health journey that's not going well, and they, the drugs they're taking aren't working, all that person needs is just a little bit of encouragement to be like, go and investigate it yourself. Listen to this. Take control of your own life. And humans do so much with such a little amount of encouragement, to know that just someone to confirm that they're thinking in the right direction or moving in the right path. And I think it's, really important that we champion people to explore their own health, listening to podcasts, listening to your show, my show, any show, reading your book, and learning about themselves. Because I actually have a kind of opposite belief, which is, and I usually start all of my one-on-one client sessions with this, is that I've got a lot of stuff in my brain, but you are you, and you've been you forever. So I don't know more about you than you do. You know everything about you, and if you don't know, we just haven't tapped into it yet. Like, practice that intuition. And I think we're, that kind of dogmatic, scientific point of view of like, I know more about you, is a result of the modern era not being very intuitive, telling you that the things that you feel, your gut feelings, your gut reactions to things are not right because the science says, or information says, or the news says. And we need to kind of reconnect with our inner soul, intuition, connection, in order to be like really, really aware of what's happening in our body.
Yeah, no, and I think, this is what I love about the health coaching space, is like, health coaches are, by definition, by design, we're not supposed to tell people like, do this, do that, don't eat this, don't eat that, right? It's like, we're supposed to invoke information, not impart so much information, right? We're supposed to be like guides of people's own intelligence and wisdom, right? And so I love that, and I agree.
Yeah, no, I feel the same about the health coaching space. It's like, because if you can implore people to uncover a truth that they found, it's so much more empowering to execute on it than, because we've all been told heaps of stuff that would probably change our lives that we didn't do anything with.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sweet, man. Well, I guess we probably should get into the time. We should wrap up because, listeners have lives, apparently. So where can everybody find your stuff online and your book?
Yeah, so you can find my book on Amazon. You can search up Return to Human and just make sure to click the little filter books so that you can find it. As for my, where you can find me on social media, you can find me on Instagram at live.damn.well, and you can find my YouTube channel at livedamnwell. And that is pretty much it.
Amazing. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. And for everybody listening, if you've enjoyed this episode, take a screenshot, share it into your social media stories, tag everybody that's not deplatformed on that particular platform, because it's cool to know who's listening in and what they're getting from it. So, and I guess to conclude this amazing conversation, what do you believe is one piece of health information that you wish more people knew about?
Trauma. I recently talked about this on my Instagram. For me, when I started to learn that no supplement, no amount of, dietary dogma or going vegan or going animal-based or going keto, it wasn't going to solve what was really, really wrong with my health. It might help a lot, but it wasn't really going to get to the root of a lot of things. And I would strongly recommend you look into Dr. Gabor Mate's work on trauma, because he changed my life, and that is no exaggeration. Without him, there would be none of that compassion that I talked about at the end of my book.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah, Gabor Mate is phenomenal.
He is. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for having me on yours.
Of course.
Thanks, Jorge. We'll catch you really soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
See you, man.
See ya.